Chapter 1, The Paper Trail. Detective Sarah Chen had been staring at financial records for so long that the numbers had begun to blur together like rain on a windshield. It was 9:30 on a Tuesday evening, and the fluorescent lights in the Major Crimes Unit hummed their monotonous song above her desk. She rubbed her eyes, reached for her coffee, and found it cold again. Always cold. In her 12 years with the department, she'd developed a peculiar talent for forgetting about coffee until it had transformed from comfort to punishment. The file before her belonged to Marcus Webb, a 42-year-old investment banker who had been found dead in his Tribeca apartment 3 weeks earlier. The official ruling was suicide, a single gunshot wound to the head, his own registered firearm, no signs of forced entry. Open and shut, the medical examiner had said. Tragic but clear. Sarah's lieutenant, a pragmatic man named Douglas Reeves who counted clearance rates the way some men counted sheep, had been ready to close the case after 72 hours. But Sarah couldn't sleep with questions unanswered, and this case whispered questions in the dark. She pulled out the photograph of Marcus Webb taken at some charity gala 6 months before his death. He stood between two other men in expensive tuxedos, champagne flutes raised toward the camera, frozen in a moment of apparent celebration. Webb's smile didn't quite reach his eyes. Sarah had noticed that immediately. She'd seen enough crime scene photos, enough driver's licenses, enough yearbook pictures of victims to recognize the difference between genuine joy and its performance. The man to Webb's left was Richard Castellane, CEO of Meridian Capital, one of the largest private equity firms in the city. To his right stood James Whitmore, a name that appeared on buildings, in newspaper business sections, and on donor plaques at every major museum and hospital in Manhattan. Old money meeting newer money, all dressed in the same uniform of wealth. Sarah's partner, Detective Luis Moreno, had gone home 2 hours ago to his wife and twin daughters. He'd lingered at his desk before leaving, organizing files that didn't need organizing, a telltale sign that he wanted to say something but wasn't sure he should. "You're still looking at Webb," he'd finally said. It wasn't a question. "Something's off, Luis. The man was being investigated by the SEC. He was about to lose everything. Sometimes that's enough." Luis had spoken gently, the way he might speak to his daughters when explaining that not every story has a happy ending. Then why keep such meticulous records? Sarah had gestured to the boxes of documents Webb's attorney had been compelled to turn over. Why document every transaction, every meeting, every phone call if you're planning to check out? Luis had shrugged, pulled on his jacket, and offered her a sympathetic smile before heading toward the elevator. She'd watched him go, knowing he thought she was chasing shadows, and knowing she might be right to chase them anyway. Now, alone in the too-bright office, Sarah returned to the financial records. Marcus Webb had been a managing director at Castellane & Associates before moving to Meridian Capital 3 years ago. His specialty was offshore investment structures, the legal kind, his attorney had emphasized, though legal and ethical didn't always shake hands. The SEC investigation had centered on suspicious currency transfers, millions moving through shell companies in the Cayman Islands, Singapore, Cyprus. Money with no clear origin and no clear destination, flowing like water through carefully constructed channels. Webb had been cooperating with federal investigators. His attorney, a sharp woman named Patricia Gaines who wore pearls and tactical impatience in equal measure, had made that very clear during their interview. "Marcus came to us 6 months ago," Gaines had explained in her corner office overlooking Central Park, a space where even the air seemed expensive. He realized the structures he'd helped create were being used for purposes beyond his original understanding. He wanted to make it right. "What purposes?" Sarah had asked. Gaines had chosen her words carefully, as attorneys do. He believed certain clients were using his investment vehicles to launder money from questionable sources. He had documentation. He was prepared to testify. "Where is this documentation now?" "We turned everything over to the SEC and the U.S. Attorney's Office as part of his cooperation agreement." "Everything?" Gaines had hesitated then, just for a moment, but Sarah had built a career on noticing hesitations. Everything relevant to the federal investigation, yes. Sarah had made a note to follow up on that particular choice of words. Now she flipped through the bank statements again, this time focusing not on the large transfers that had caught the SEC's attention, but on the smaller ones. Patterns emerged if you knew how to look. Regular payments to the same accounts. Monthly transfers that never varied by more than a few dollars. She grabbed her highlighter and began marking them, yellow for consistent payees, pink for amounts that seemed too precise to be random. By midnight, she had 17 highlighted transactions, all made in the 6 months before Webb's death, all to accounts registered to limited liability companies with generic names: Summit Holdings LLC, Apex Management Group, Cornerstone Ventures. The kind of names that sounded important but meant nothing, corporate shells designed to obscure rather than illuminate. She ran the LLCs through the state business registry. Each had been incorporated within the last 2 years. Each listed a registered agent rather than actual owners. Each had an address that, when she looked it up, turned out to be a virtual office space in Midtown, the kind of place where you could rent a prestigious mailing address for $100 a month and never set foot in the building. Sarah leaned back in her chair and stared at the ceiling tiles, one of which had a water stain shaped vaguely like a handgun. The universe had a dark sense of humor. Marcus Webb had been sending money, his own money, from his personal accounts, to shell companies. Not the huge sums that moved through his professional dealings, but smaller amounts. 20,000 here, 15,000 there. Over 6 months, it totaled nearly $230,000. The question was why. Blackmail was her first thought, but the payments were too regular, too businesslike. Blackmail victims usually tried to negotiate, to reduce payments, to miss them occasionally. These transfers had the rhythm of rent, of obligation, of something agreed upon. She pulled up Webb's phone records next, another document the attorney had provided. In the weeks before his death, he'd made dozens of calls to the same number. The number was registered to a prepaid cell phone, purchased with cash from a convenience store in Queens. Untraceable in any meaningful way. The calls had grown more frequent as his death approached, twice a day in the final week, 3 times on the last day of his life. The final call had come at 10:47 p.m., approximately 4 hours before the estimated time of death. Sarah made a note to request the actual phone from evidence. Even if the prepaid couldn't be traced, maybe Webb's phone would yield something, a voicemail, a text message, some fragment of conversation that might explain what had driven him to such desperate measures in those final hours. She was about to pack up for the night when she noticed something she'd missed before. In the corner of the gala photograph, partially obscured by Richard Castellane's shoulder, stood another figure. The person was slightly out of focus, turned partially away from the camera, but something about the posture struck her as deliberate. Not the casual inattention of someone caught at a bad angle, but the careful positioning of someone who didn't want to be seen clearly. Sarah pulled out a magnifying glass from her desk drawer. Yes, she actually owned one, and yes, Louise made fun of her for it, and examined the figure more closely. A woman, probably in her 50s, wearing an elegant black dress and a distinctive piece of jewelry, a necklace with a large amber pendant. Her face was mostly turned away, but Sarah could make out a sharp chin, severe dark hair pulled back, an impression of controlled elegance. She photographed the detail with her phone and made a mental note to show it to the event organizers, see if they had a full guest list. In her experience, the people who tried hardest not to be noticed were often the ones worth noticing most. The office had grown very quiet. Even the custodial staff had finished their rounds and departed, leaving Sarah alone with the hum of fluorescent lights and the distant rumble of the subway beneath the building. She gathered her files, locked them in her desk drawer, and pulled on the coat she'd hung over her chair 6 hours earlier. As she walked toward the elevator, her phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number: "Stop looking into Webb. Some doors stay closed for a reason." Sarah stopped walking. Read the message again. Her first instinct was to call it in, to show someone, to follow protocol. Her second instinct, the one that had kept her alive through 12 years of dangerous work, told her that whoever sent this message wanted her to be scared, wanted her to back down, and therefore had given her the single best reason to keep pushing forward. She screenshotted the message, forwarded it to her personal email, and deleted it from her phone. Then she called Luis. He answered on the third ring, his voice thick with sleep. "Chen. It's almost 1 in the morning. I need you to come in early tomorrow. There's something you need to see." "What happened?" Sarah stepped into the elevator, watched the doors close, and saw her reflection in the polished metal, tired eyes, determined expression, coffee stain on her collar that she hadn't noticed until now. "I think Marcus Webb was murdered," she said. "And I think I just became a problem for someone who doesn't like problems." The line was quiet for a moment. Then Luis sighed, and she could hear him shifting, probably sitting up in bed, already resigned to the long road ahead. "I'll bring the good coffee," he said. The elevator descended into the building's dark heart, carrying Sarah down with it, and she thought about doors that stayed closed, and the kind of people who had the power to keep them that way. Chapter 2, The Locked Doors. Luis arrived at 7:30 the next morning carrying 2 large coffees and a brown paper bag that smelled like salvation. Sarah had been at her desk since 6, running background checks on the shell companies, cross-referencing board members, tracing corporate structures that twisted and turned like intestines. She looked up when Luis set the coffee in front of her, and he noticed immediately that she hadn't gone home. "Same clothes as yesterday," he observed, settling into his chair. "I went home. I showered. These just happen to look exactly like yesterday's clothes." She took a sip of the coffee and closed her eyes in gratitude. "You brought the good stuff. I brought bribes. You sounded intense on the phone." He pulled a bagel from the bag and slid it across to her desk. "Show me what you found." Sarah walked him through it, the shell companies, the regular payments, the prepaid phone, the threatening text message. She showed him the photograph from the gala with the mysterious woman in the background, though in the morning light she felt slightly foolish about that detail. Luis listened without interrupting, which meant he was taking her seriously. When she finished, he sat back and stared at the evidence board she'd constructed overnight, a web of connections drawn in different colored markers. "The text message is a problem," he said finally. "You reported it?" "Not yet. Sarah. I will. But if I report it now, Reeves pulls me off the case. You know he will. We're already over budget on investigative hours, and this is officially a closed suicide. The moment I tell him someone's threatening me, he'll say I'm too personally involved, and he'll reassign it to someone who'll file it and forget it." Luis rubbed his face with both hands, a gesture she recognized as his tell for internal conflict between regulation and loyalty. "You're asking me to sit on a direct threat against my partner. I'm asking you to give me 48 hours to find something concrete. If someone wants me to stop looking, that means there's something to find. Or it means there's a crazy person with your phone number. From an untraceable burner phone, sent within an hour of me pulling specific financial records. That's not crazy. That's connected." Luis took a long drink of his coffee, and Sarah knew she had him. He was a by-the-book detective 90% of the time, but that last 10%, that's where the real police work happened. 48 hours, he agreed. "But we do this together. No lone wolf nonsense. And if anything else happens, anything at all, we report it immediately. Deal." They spent the next 2 hours building a strategy. Luis would focus on tracking down the woman in the photograph, starting with the charity gala's organizers. Sarah would visit Marcus Webb's apartment building, talk to neighbors, doormen, anyone who might have seen something unusual in the days before his death. The crime scene unit had been thorough, but they'd been looking for evidence of suicide, not murder. Different questions yielded different answers. The Tribeca building where Webb had lived was exactly what Sarah expected, pre-war elegance updated with modern security, the kind of place where discretion was part of the lease agreement. The doorman, A man in his 60s named Vincent, who wore his uniform like a second skin, greeted her with professional courtesy that cooled noticeably when she showed her badge. "We already talked to the police," he said. "Terrible thing, what happened to Mr. Webb. But we cooperated fully with the investigation." "I appreciate that, Vincent. I'm just following up on a few details." "You were working the night he died?" "No, ma'am. That was Terrence. He works the overnight shift, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. Is Terrence available?" "He's off today. Back tomorrow night." Sarah made a note. "What about the days before? Did you notice anything unusual about Mr. Webb's behavior? Any visitors that stood out?" Vincent's expression became carefully neutral, the look of a man who'd learned when to see and when to be blind. "Mr. Webb kept to himself mostly. Polite gentleman. Always said good morning." "But?" Sarah prompted, because there was definitely a "but" hovering in the air between them. Vincent glanced toward the security camera above his desk, then back to Sarah. When he spoke, his voice was lower. "Last few weeks, he seemed stressed. Distracted. He'd forget to say hello, forget his mail. That wasn't like him. And he had a visitor, about a week before it happened. A woman I hadn't seen before." "Can you describe her?" "Older lady, maybe 50s or 60s. Well dressed. Dark hair. She wore sunglasses even though it was evening, which struck me as odd. She said she was an old friend, asked me to ring up to Mr. Webb's apartment. He came down to meet her instead of having her come up, which was unusual. They talked outside for maybe 10 minutes. It didn't look friendly." Sarah felt her pulse quicken. "Did you hear what they said?" "No, ma'am. They walked down the street a bit. But when she left, Mr. Webb looked shaken. He sat on that bench there for a long time before coming back inside." "Did she give a name?" Vincent shook his head. "I didn't ask. In this building, we don't ask questions we don't need answered. People value their privacy." Sarah understood. Privacy was just another word for secrets when you had enough money to afford it. "If I showed you a photograph, could you tell me if she's the same woman?" "I could try." She pulled up the gala photo on her phone, zoomed in on the figure in the background. Vincent studied it carefully, then nodded slowly. "Could be. The necklace looks familiar, that big amber stone. Not many people wear something that distinctive." Sarah thanked him and headed toward the elevator. Webb's apartment was on the 14th floor, still sealed with police tape though the investigation had been officially closed. She'd brought the key that had been logged into evidence, and she ducked under the tape with the strange feeling of trespassing that always accompanied returning to a closed crime scene. The apartment was exactly as they'd left it. Expensive furniture with the impersonal quality of an interior designer's vision. Abstract art on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. The kind of place that cost more per month than most people earned in a year, and somehow still felt empty. She stood in the living room where Webb had died. The carpet had been removed, evidence of blood spatter, leaving bare hardwood. She could see the outline where his body had fallen, could picture the scene as documented in the crime scene photos. Webb in expensive pajamas, the gun nearby, a glass of scotch on the coffee table, half finished. But something nagged at her. She pulled out the crime scene report on her phone and read through it again. The gun had been found near his right hand. Webb was right-handed, according to his driver's license and the way he'd signed documents. The entry wound was on the right temple. Trajectory consistent with self-infliction. Gunshot residue on his hand. All the markers of suicide. Except. Sarah walked to where the gun had been found. Then she walked to the bar cart across the room where the scotch bottle sat. Then back to the coffee table with the half-finished glass. She was recreating the scene in her mind. Webb pours himself a drink, sits on the couch, drinks half of it, then stands up, retrieves the gun from wherever he kept it, the bedroom safe, according to the initial report, returns to the living room, and shoots himself. But the Scotch glass bothered her. It was positioned on the coffee table at an odd angle, not centered on the coaster but slightly off, as if it had been placed there hastily. And there was no bottle on the table, which meant Webb had poured the drink at the bar, carried it to the couch, sat down, drank from it, then left it there to get the gun. She photographed the scene from multiple angles, making notes. It was thin, too thin to mean anything definitive, but it added to the accumulating weight of wrong details. In the bedroom, she found Webb's laptop, which had already been examined by the digital forensics team. They'd found nothing incriminating. He'd wiped the browser history, deleted emails, the actions of a man preparing to end his life or a man preparing to hide something. But they hadn't been looking for signs of duress. They hadn't been asking whether someone might have forced him to delete those files. Sarah sat at Webb's desk and looked around the room. Everything was neat, organized. The bed was made with military precision. Books on the shelf arranged by height. Even his closet, visible through the half-open door, showed clothes hanging at exact intervals. This was a man who controlled his environment, who needed order. Would someone that methodical really shoot himself in the living room, on the expensive carpet, creating chaos in the space he'd curated so carefully? Her phone rang. Luis. I got a name, he said without preamble. The woman in the photograph. I showed it to the event coordinator, and she recognized the necklace. It's a signature piece, apparently. Belongs to a woman named Evelyn Marchant. Sarah wrote down the name. Who is she? That's where it gets interesting. Evelyn Marchant is the director of compliance at Whitmore Industries. Has been for 20 years. She reports directly to James Whitmore himself. Sarah remembered Whitmore from the gala photo, old money, legitimate business empire, the kind of man who appeared in the society pages and the business section in equal measure. Why would Whitmore's compliance director be visiting Marcus Webb? That's the question. I called Whitmore Industries, asked to speak with Ms. Marchant. They said she's out of the office on extended leave. Started 3 weeks ago. Right after Webb died. Right after Webb died, Luis confirmed. Sarah, I think you're onto something. But I also think we need to be very careful about how we proceed. These aren't street criminals. These are people with lawyers on retainer and connections in high places. Sarah stared out Webb's window at the river below, watching a barge push slowly upstream against the current. Set up a meeting with Patricia Gaines, Webb's attorney. I want to know what she meant when she said they turned over everything relevant to the feds. And see if you can find an address for Evelyn Marchant. I'd like to have a conversation with her about old friends and amber necklaces. On it. Where are you? Webb's apartment. Luis, the scene doesn't feel right. I can't prove it yet, but something happened here that isn't in the reports. Trust your gut. It's gotten us this far. He paused. But watch your back. Someone's already warned you off once. They might not be so subtle next time. After he hung up, Sarah spent another hour in the apartment, photographing, measuring, trying to see what the first investigators had missed. As she was leaving, she noticed something wedged behind the radiator in the bedroom, a small piece of paper, folded several times. She pulled it out carefully, unfolded it. It was a receipt from a copy shop in Queens, dated 4 days before Webb's death. For scanning services, document copying, and a thumb drive. Sarah bagged the receipt and left the apartment, her mind racing. Webb had made copies of something, somewhere away from his office and his home, using a random copy shop in Queens where he wouldn't be recognized. The question was, copies of what, and where were they now? The answer, she suspected, was worth killing for. Chapter 3, The Hidden Archive. Patricia Gaines kept them waiting for exactly 20 minutes, which Sarah suspected was calculated to remind them of the hierarchy. Attorneys had power that detectives merely borrowed. When they were finally shown into her office, Gaines sat behind a desk that probably cost more than Sarah's car, her expression pleasant but guarded. Detectives. I wasn't aware the Webb case was still active. It's not, officially, Sarah said, taking the seat Gaines indicated. Luis remained standing, his preferred position during interviews. We're just tying up some loose ends. What kind of loose ends require revisiting a closed suicide? Gaines's tone was professionally curious, but her fingers had tightened almost imperceptibly around her pen. Sarah pulled out the receipt from the copy shop. We found this in Mr. Webb's apartment. For days before his death, he made copies of documents at a shop in Queens. Can you tell us what he might have been copying? Gaines studied the receipt without touching it, as if it might contaminate her carefully manicured world. I have no idea. Marcus didn't share every detail of his daily activities with me. But he was your client. He was cooperating with federal investigators. Surely you knew what documents he possessed. I knew what documents were relevant to his cooperation agreement. Those were turned over to the appropriate authorities. And the irrelevant ones? Luis asked from his position by the window. Gaines met his gaze steadily. I can't speak to documents I haven't seen. Sarah leaned forward. Ms. Gaines, when we spoke before, you said you turned over everything relevant to the investigation. That phrasing suggests there was something you deemed irrelevant. What was it? For a long moment, Gaines said nothing. Her office was so quiet Sarah could hear the antique clock on the credenza ticking away seconds. Finally, the attorney stood and walked to her window, looking out at Central Park far below. There are rules, she said quietly, about attorney-client privilege, about what I can and cannot disclose. Even after a client's death, those obligations continue. Unless there's evidence of a crime, Sarah countered. If Marcus Webb was murdered. Was he? Gaines turned sharply. Do you have evidence of that, Detective Chen? Because the medical examiner ruled suicide. The crime scene supported suicide. Without evidence to the contrary, all you have is speculation, and speculation doesn't override privilege. Sarah felt the door closing, could see it in the set of Gaines's shoulders, the professional distance reasserting itself. She made a decision, the kind that could end her career or break a case open. 3 weeks ago, I received a threat. An anonymous message telling me to stop investigating Webb's death. Someone knows I'm looking, and they're worried about what I might find. That suggests there's something to find, doesn't it? Gaines's expression flickered, surprise, concern, calculation. You should report that. I'm reporting it to you. Right now. Marcus Webb came to you for help 6 months ago. He trusted you to protect him while he did the right thing. He's dead, Ms. Gaines. And someone wants to make sure no one asks too many questions about why. So I'm asking, did he give you something? Something he wanted kept safe? The attorney returned to her desk, sat down, and folded her hands with deliberate care. When she spoke, her voice was measured, each word chosen with lawyer's precision. Hypothetically, she began, and Sarah felt her pulse quicken. If a client provided materials beyond the scope of a specific investigation, materials that client believed might be dangerous to possess, an attorney might secure those materials. For safekeeping. To be released only under specific circumstances or to specific parties. What circumstances? Again, hypothetically, a client might stipulate that such materials only be released if they died under suspicious circumstances. Or if certain individuals were implicated in wrongdoing. A sort of insurance policy. And if that client died? If it looked like suicide but might not be? Gaines met Sarah's eyes directly. Then the attorney would face a difficult decision about whether the circumstances warranted release. Whether doing so would honor the client's wishes or betray them. Whether the materials were evidence of a crime or simply explosive personal information that would harm innocent people. Luis moved closer to the desk. Ms. Gaines, with respect, if you have evidence related to a possible homicide. I said hypothetically, Detective Moreno. But something in her expression had shifted, a crack in the professional facade. However, if I were to discover such materials, and if I determined they constituted potential evidence, I would be obligated to turn them over to law enforcement. That's exactly what the rules require. She opened her desk drawer and removed a small thumb drive, setting it on the desk between them. I found this among my client's effects this morning. I hadn't noticed it before. It was in a sealed envelope marked, insurance. Sarah stared at the drive, understanding the game being played. Gaines had possessed this all along but needed plausible deniability for releasing it. The hypothetical conversation had been her way of explaining, of justifying, of covering herself legally while still doing what she believed Marcus Webb would have wanted. "You haven't looked at it?" Sarah asked. "I only just found it," Gaines repeated, her tone making clear that this was the story and would remain the story. "But I trust you'll review its contents and determine their relevance to your investigation." Sarah took the drive. "Thank you, Ms. Gaines." "Detective Chen," Gaines said as they stood to leave, "Marcus was a good man who got caught up in something larger than himself. He tried to do the right thing. I hope that counts for something." "It does," Sarah assured her. "We'll make sure it does." Back in the car, Louise held the thumb drive up to the light as if its secrets might be visible from the outside. She was scared. Terrified, Sarah agreed. She knows exactly what's on this drive, and she knows it's dangerous enough that Webb made copies and hid them. So why give it to us? Why not just destroy it and pretend it never existed? Sarah started the engine. Because she's a good lawyer, and good lawyers hate loose ends. If she destroys evidence and we find out some other way, she's disbarred and possibly criminally liable. If she gives it to us, she's following the rules. And maybe, just maybe, she actually wants justice for her client. They went straight back to the station, ignoring the lunch hour, ignoring the budget meeting Reeves had scheduled for 2 p.m. Sarah's hands were almost shaking as she loaded the thumb drive into her computer, Louise standing behind her chair. The drive contained a single folder labeled, Meridian Files. Inside were hundreds of documents, emails, spreadsheets, financial statements, scanned ledgers going back 5 years. Sarah opened the first email and began reading. From m.webb@meridiancapital.com to e.marchant@whitmorend.com. Date, March 15, 2024. Subject, quarterly transfers. Evelyn. I'm uncomfortable with the volume we're moving through the Cyprus accounts. The origin flags are increasingly difficult to explain as legitimate investment capital. I need more transparency about the source or I'll have to recommend we halt operations. Marcus. Sarah opened the reply. From e.marchant@whitmorend.com to m.webb@meridiancapital.com. Date, March 16, 2024. Subject, quarterly transfers. Marcus. Your concerns are noted but misplaced. The capital is legitimate, vetted at the highest levels. Your role is structuring, not sourcing. Please proceed as directed. This comes from the top. M. From the top, Louise read over her shoulder. Meaning Whitmore himself? Sarah clicked through more emails, watching the pattern emerge. Webb raising concerns, Marchant dismissing them. References to approved clients, to protected channels, to amounts that made Sarah's head spin. 50 million here, 80 million there, hundreds of millions flowing through the offshore accounts Webb had structured. Then she found the spreadsheet that made everything clear. It was titled Source Documentation and contained 3 columns, Amount, Origin Code, and Actual Source. The origin codes were generic, private investment, institutional capital, family office funds. But the actual source column told a different story. Russian oligarchs under sanctions. Chinese officials moving money out of the country. South American cartels laundering drug proceeds. Middle Eastern arms dealers. A greatest hits of international criminals, all using the investment structures Marcus Webb had created to wash their dirty money clean through legitimate American businesses. And at the bottom of the spreadsheet, in a separate section highlighted in red, was a list of names Sarah recognized. Politicians. Judges. Regulatory officials. Each with an amount next to their name ranging from $50,000 to $2 million. Jesus Christ, Luis whispered. They were bribing government officials to look the other way. Sarah felt cold despite the overheated office. Not just looking the other way. Look at the positions. SEC commissioners. Federal prosecutors. State banking regulators. They bought protection at every level that could possibly investigate them. She clicked on another document, this one a memo from Evelyn Marchant to James Whitmore. Mr. Whitmore. Webb is becoming a liability. His conscience is creating risk we cannot afford. Recommend immediate termination of his involvement and retrieval of all documentation. Castellane agrees this is necessary and urgent. M. The memo was dated 3 weeks before Marcus Webb's death. Termination of his involvement, Sarah read aloud. That's corporate speak for murder. Luis pulled out his phone. We need to bring this to the DA immediately. This is way beyond a homicide case. This is corruption, money laundering, possibly conspiracy to commit murder. And it implicates some of the most powerful people in the city, Sarah interrupted. Look at this list, Luis. That's a federal judge. That's a congressman. That's the deputy mayor. If we walk into the DA's office with this, who's to say it doesn't disappear? Who's to say someone on this list doesn't make a phone call and suddenly we're the ones under investigation? Luis lowered his phone, his expression grim. So what do we do? Sarah copied the entire contents of the thumb drive onto her laptop, then onto a second drive she kept in her desk for backups. We document everything. We build a case so airtight that no one can make it disappear. And we find Evelyn Marchant, because she's the thread that connects all of this. If she's smart, she's already in the wind. Extended leave could mean she's in the Caymans or Switzerland or anywhere that doesn't have an extradition treaty. Sarah pulled up the DMV records for Evelyn Marchant, found her address in Westchester County. Or she's exactly where she's always been, thinking she's untouchable because she's protected by people who've never faced consequences for anything. Her computer pinged with a new email. No sender address, no subject line. Sarah opened it with a sense of inevitability. You were warned. This is your last chance to walk away. Marcus Webb learned what happens to people who don't listen. Choose wisely. She showed it to Luis, watched his jaw tighten. That's it, he said. We're reporting this to Reeves, and we're requesting protection. No, Sarah said. We're going to Westchester County. We're bringing Evelyn Marchant in for questioning. And then, only then, we're bringing this whole corrupt house of cards down. She stood, grabbed her jacket, checked her service weapon out of habit. Luis didn't move. Sarah, these people killed Marcus Webb and made it look like suicide. They've bought half the government. They've got more money and power than we can imagine. If we push this, then we push it, she said simply. That's the job, Luis. We push until something breaks or we do. And I don't break easily. After a long moment, Luis nodded and followed her to the door. Behind them, the computer screen still glowed with the evidence of crimes that reached higher than either of them had imagined, corruption that had roots in foundations they'd thought were solid. The scandal was vast. But as Sarah would soon discover, vast scandals had a way of stopping precisely where powerful people needed them to stop. And she was about to learn exactly how high that ceiling was. Chapter 4, The Ceiling. The drive to Westchester took 45 minutes through traffic that seemed determined to test Sarah's patience. Luis spent most of it on the phone with the county sheriff's office, coordinating courtesy notification, professional protocol when city detectives crossed into suburban jurisdiction. Sarah listened with half an ear while reviewing the documents on her laptop, memorizing names, amounts, connections. Evidence had to live in your bones before you could testify to it convincingly. Evelyn Marchant's house sat at the end of a tree-lined street where the homes grew larger and more secluded with each passing number. Old money architecture, new money security systems. Sarah noted the cameras at the gate, the manicured lawn, the three-car garage. Compliance directors at legitimate companies made good salaries, but this was beyond good. This was very, very well compensated silence. They parked on the street and approached the front door. Louise rang the bell while Sarah positioned herself to see anyone who might try to exit through the back. The door opened after 30 seconds, and a woman stood in the frame, late 50s, severe dark hair pulled back, wearing casual clothes that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. The amber necklace from the photographs hung at her throat. Evelyn Marchant. Sarah held up her badge. The woman's face remained perfectly composed, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear, maybe. Or resignation. I wondered when you'd come. We have some questions about Marcus Webb. Of course you do. Marchant stepped back from the door. You'd better come in. The interior matched the exterior, tasteful, expensive, carefully curated. They followed Marchant into a sitting room where she gestured to a sofa upholstered in fabric that felt like sin against Sarah's hands. Marchant took the chair opposite, crossed her legs, and waited with the patience of someone who'd been preparing for this conversation. You visited Marcus Webb a week before his death, Sarah began. The doorman remembers you. Remembers it didn't look friendly. It wasn't, Marchant said simply. I was trying to save his life, though I suppose I failed at that. Louise pulled out his notebook. Save his life from what? From himself. From his conscience. From decisions that were already made by people far above his pay grade. She stood abruptly, walked to a cabinet, and poured herself something amber from a crystal decanter. She didn't offer them any. Marcus was brilliant at building structures, at creating legal mechanisms for moving money. But he had the unfortunate quality of caring where that money came from. So you knew about the money laundering, Sarah said. Marchant laughed, a bitter sound. Detective, I didn't just know about it. I managed it. That was my job for 20 years, making sure the right palms were greased, the right officials looked the other way, the right questions never got asked. I was very good at it. Was? Louise caught the past tense. I resigned 3 weeks ago. Submitted my letter the day after Marcus died, though it won't be official until various paperwork is processed. I'm done being good at things that keep me awake at night. Sarah leaned forward. Ms. Marchant, are you telling us that James Whitmore and Richard Castellane were running a money laundering operation through Meridian Capital? I'm telling you that the operation you've discovered is a fraction of the whole picture. Meridian was one branch. Whitmore Industries has dozens of subsidiaries, each handling different revenue streams from different sources. The amount Marcus documented was barely 10% of the total volume. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Sarah's mind raced through the implications. How much money are we talking about? Billions. Annually. For years. Marchant took a long drink. It's not just about the money, though. It's about control. When you handle that much dirty money for that many dangerous people, you become indispensable. Untouchable. The Russians can't move against you because you control their wealth in America. The cartels need you because you're their access to legitimate markets. The politicians you bought stay bought because their fortunes are tied to yours. It's a perfect system. Nothing's perfect, Louise said. Marcus Webb found the flaws. Marcus Webb became a liability, Marchant corrected. I tried to warn him. That's why I went to his apartment. I told him to stop cooperating with the feds, to destroy whatever documentation he'd kept, to disappear if necessary. I even offered to help him run. And what did he say? Sarah asked, though she already knew. He said he couldn't live with himself if he didn't try to make it right. He said someone had to stop it, and if not him, then who? Marchant's voice cracked slightly. Noble. Stupid. Fatal. Sarah pulled out her phone, showed Marchant the memo she'd found on the thumb drive. You sent this to Whitmore. You recommended his termination. I recommended terminating his involvement with the company, yes. Severance, a generous settlement, an NDA, letting him walk away. That's what I recommended. Marchant's hands tightened around her glass. But that's not what happened, is it? Because James doesn't let people walk away. Not when they know what Marcus knew. You're saying James Whitmore had Marcus Webb killed, Louise stated flatly. I'm saying Marcus Webb is dead, and 2 days before he died, James asked me to get the security codes for Marcus's apartment building. Said he wanted to send someone to retrieve company property. I refused. I told him it was too risky, too obvious. We had a disagreement. What kind of disagreement? Marchant stood and walked to the window, looking out at her perfectly maintained lawn. The kind where I was reminded that I've facilitated crimes for 20 years, that I've taken money from criminals, that my name is on documents that would send me to prison for the rest of my life. The kind where I understood that I was just as trapped as Marcus, just smart enough to know it. Sarah joined her at the window. You could testify. With what you know, with your cooperation, you could bring down the entire operation. Could I? Marchant turned to face her, and Sarah saw something hollowed out behind her eyes. Tell me, detective, have you looked at the list of people on Whitmore's payroll? Really looked at it? Federal judges, prosecutors, politicians. Your district attorney, Marchant interrupted. Robert Morrison. He received $600,000 over 3 years, funneled through a consulting agreement with a shell company. The U.S. Attorney for the Southern District, Margaret Chen. No relation, Sarah said automatically. Has taken $1.2 million. The head of the SEC's Enforcement Division. 3 members of the State Banking Board. 2 FBI supervisory agents. A deputy director at FinCEN. Marchant's voice was flat, reciting horror with the tone of a grocery list. You can't prosecute this case because everyone who would prosecute it has already been bought. The room fell silent except for the ticking of an antique clock on the mantel. Sarah felt something cold settling in her stomach, the weight of understanding what she was truly up against. Louise spoke carefully. If the system is that corrupted, why are you talking to us? Because I'm tired, Marchant said simply. I'm tired of being afraid, tired of being complicit, tired of watching good men die because they believed in things like justice and consequences. Marcus believed in those things, right up until someone put a gun to his head and forced him to pull the trigger. You have proof it was murder? Sarah's pulse quickened. I have a phone call I received at 11:15 p.m. the night Marcus died. From James Whitmore. He said, and I quote, "The Webb problem has been resolved. There may be questions. You'll handle them." I said I didn't understand. He said I didn't need to understand, I just needed to do my job if anyone came asking. Then he hung up. Sarah pulled out her recorder. Ms. Marchant, I need you to repeat that on the record. Marchant looked at the device, then at Sarah, then back out the window. For a long moment, she didn't speak. When she finally turned back, her expression was resigned. Detective Chen, I've just confessed to 2 decades of criminal activity. I've implicated myself in money laundering, bribery, conspiracy. And I've told you that the people who would normally prosecute such crimes are the very ones being protected. What exactly do you think happens next? We find someone clean, Sarah insisted. Federal level, above the corruption. We go to Washington if we have to. Marchant's laugh cut her off. You sweet, naive woman. This doesn't stop at the city or state level. You think senators don't have offshore accounts? You think congressional campaign funds don't come from somewhere? The ceiling isn't local, detective. It's national. It's the fucking sky. Sarah's phone rang. Lieutenant Reeves. She answered. Chen, get back here. Now. His voice was tight with barely controlled anger. Lieutenant, we're in the middle of. I know exactly where you are and what you're doing, and I'm telling you to stand down immediately. That's an order. Sarah met Louis's eyes, saw her own dread reflected there. Sir, we have a witness willing to testify about. You have nothing, Reeves snapped. You have an unauthorized investigation into a closed case, you have interstate jurisdiction violations, and you have about 30 minutes to get back to my office before I suspend you both. Move. Now. The line went dead. Marchant smiled sadly. And so it begins. That's how it works, detective. Someone makes a call. Your lieutenant gets a call from someone higher up who got a call from someone higher still. The system protects itself. It always does. Sarah stood frozen, the recorder still in her hand, justice slipping through her fingers like smoke. Come on, Louise said quietly, touching her elbow. We have to go. As they walked to the door, Marchant called after them. Detective Chen. For what it's worth, I hope you prove me wrong. I really do. But her tone said she knew better. The drive back to the city was silent, both of them understanding that they were driving toward the ceiling, the place where scandal stopped, where truth bent, where the powerful remained powerful and the dead stayed dead. Marcus Webb had reached that ceiling. Now it was their turn to hit it. Chapter 5, What Remains. The suspension came through before they reached the precinct. Sarah's phone buzzed with the official email while they were still on the highway, effective immediately, pending an internal investigation into procedural violations and insubordination. Luis received his 30 seconds later. They sat in traffic, badges suddenly meaningless, while the city sprawled indifferent around them. We could leak it, Luis said finally. Give everything to a journalist. Let the press run with it. Sarah had already considered this. Half the media outlets in the city have received donations from Whitmore. The other half rely on advertising from companies he has stakes in. And even if we found someone brave enough to publish, what happens? A few articles, some public outrage, maybe a congressional hearing that goes nowhere. Meanwhile, we're unemployed and possibly charged with evidence tampering or worse. So we just let it go. Let them win. Sarah didn't answer immediately. She thought about Marcus Webb, about his meticulous records, about a man who'd chosen conscience over survival and paid with his life. She thought about Evelyn Marchant drinking alone in her expensive house, tired of being complicit but too entangled to escape. She thought about all the money still moving through offshore accounts, all the criminals still being protected, all the officials still collecting their payments. No, she said finally. We don't let it go. But we can't win this fight the way we thought we could. They drove to a coffee shop in Queens, far from the precinct, far from anyone who might be watching. Sarah bought 2 coffees and a table in the back corner. Then she made 3 phone calls. The first was to a reporter at a small investigative journalism nonprofit, someone who'd broken stories about corruption before and who didn't rely on advertising revenue or wealthy donors. She gave him enough details to start asking questions, pointed him toward public records that would confirm parts of the story, and sent him encrypted copies of selected documents, nothing that could be traced back to her directly, but enough to start threads pulling. The second call was to the FBI's Public Corruption Unit in Washington, specifically to an agent she'd worked with years ago on a different case, someone she trusted. She reported the bribes of federal officials, named names, and suggested they might want to audit certain bank accounts. She knew it would move slowly, if it moved at all, but she also knew that federal bureaucracy, once set in motion, was hard to stop completely. The third call was to Patricia Gaines. They suspended us, Sarah said without preamble. I know, Gaines replied. I received a very polite call from the DA's office suggesting I'd misunderstood my client's wishes regarding certain materials, and that I should consider whether I'd violated attorney-client privilege. What did you tell them? That I'd documented everything carefully and would welcome any ethics review of my conduct. Gaines paused. Detective Chen, I've been practicing law for 30 years. I know what a threat sounds like, even when it's delivered politely. But I also know that sunlight is the best disinfectant, and I've already sent copies of everything to several interested parties who exist outside the normal jurisdiction. Whatever happens to you, to me, to this case, the information is out there now. After she hung up, Sarah and Louise sat in silence, drinking bad coffee and watching people go about their ordinary lives, unaware that above them, in penthouses and boardrooms, powerful men were making phone calls, applying pressure, ensuring the scandal stopped where it needed to stop. What do we do now? Louise asked. Sarah thought about that. They were suspended, possibly facing charges, certainly being watched. The case they'd built had been buried, the witnesses intimidated, the evidence confiscated. By any conventional measure, they'd lost. But Marcus Webb's story was no longer just a closed suicide file. It was in the hands of journalists, federal agents, attorneys with nothing to lose. The truth had been scattered like seeds, and some of them might take root. We wait, Sarah said. We document everything we did and why. We prepare for whatever comes next. And we remember that this isn't about winning or losing. It's about making them work harder to bury the truth, about making it cost them something, about ensuring that Marcus Webb's death meant something. 3 months later, Sarah was working as an investigator for a private law firm specializing in whistleblower cases. Louise had taken early retirement and was teaching criminal justice at a community college. They still met for coffee every week, still watched the news for any sign that the case had surfaced. Some things did happen, quietly. A junior senator from Vermont started asking questions about offshore financial regulations. The investigative journalism piece ran, got some traction online, prompted a few editorials. 2 officials on Marchant's list retired unexpectedly, citing health reasons. James Whitmore gave a substantial donation to law enforcement charities and appeared in several photographs shaking hands with city officials, his smile confident, his empire intact. Evelyn Marchant was found dead in her Westchester home 6 weeks after their interview. Official cause: prescription drug overdose, likely accidental. Sarah attended the small funeral, stood in the back, and watched the handful of mourners who came to pay respects to a woman most of them had never really known. The scandal, as predicted, had stopped. It had hit the ceiling of power and money and influence, and it had stopped. But on the day the investigative article was published, Sarah received a package with no return address. Inside was a handwritten note and a thumb drive. The note read, "Marcus gave this to me for safekeeping, in case something happened. He said if anyone cared enough to keep looking, they deserved the whole truth. He was right about you. A friend." The thumb drive contained everything, not just what they'd already seen, but years of additional documentation, recordings of conversations, photographs, a complete map of the entire operation. More than enough to bring down not just Whitmore and Castellane, but dozens of others. Sarah held it in her hand and thought about what to do with it. She could take it public, could send it to every news outlet and law enforcement agency she could think of. But she'd learned that the system had antibodies for truth, ways of neutralizing it, of burying it under procedural objections and jurisdiction questions, and suddenly discovered technicalities. Or she could wait. Could keep it safe. Could trust that systems changed slowly, that eventually someone would be in position to actually use this information, that the ceiling that seemed impenetrable today might have cracks tomorrow. She made copies. Encrypted them. Sent them to trusted people with instructions to keep them safe, to pass them on if necessary, to remember what Marcus Webb had tried to do. And then she went back to her new job, her new life, carrying the weight of unfinished justice the way some people carried old injuries, a persistent ache, a reminder of limitations, a promise to be ready if things ever changed. 6 years later, a new U.S. attorney was appointed, someone young and ambitious and, crucially, not on any lists. A new administration in Washington was making noise about corruption and accountability. The political winds were shifting. Sarah took the thumb drive out of her safe deposit box and held it up to the light. Not yet, maybe. But someday. Because scandals stop at ceilings, yes. But ceilings, eventually, can fall. She placed it back in the box, closed the small metal door, and walked out into the afternoon sun, past the ordinary people living ordinary lives, all of them unaware of the secrets locked in vaults, waiting for their moment. Marcus Webb had believed that truth mattered, that justice was worth dying for, that someone had to try. Sarah believed that too. And she could wait as long as it took. The scandal had stopped. But the story, she knew, wasn't over. It never really was.